So you've got this huge announcement coming from the US about Venezuela, and almost immediately, a really forceful rejection from Caracas. Today, we're going to dive into these two powerful and totally conflicting stories as they just collide on the world stage.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. The source material kicks off with this really powerful quote, and it's attributed to then-President Donald Trump. The statement pretty clearly suggests a direct U.S. role in managing a transition in Venezuela.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, a plan made in Washington is one thing, but how it actually lands in Caracas, that's a whole different story. This is the exact conflict that our source material really digs into.
Now, according to the source, this wasn't just some vague statement of what they wanted to do. Nope, it was actually presented as a detailed plan with very specific parts and clear goals.
So, this source really breaks down this alleged U.S. strategy into a few key pieces. First, a military action that's described as an invasion and a kidnapping. Second, a really clear economic reason, getting control of Venezuela's oil. And finally, the plan to put a new cooperative leader in charge, Vice President Delcy Rodríguez.
But, as you can probably imagine, that version of events did not just go unanswered. The source immediately pivots to show us the counter-story coming directly from Venezuelan officials.
And this is where you really see the two stories just crash into each other. The source says the U.S. claimed Vice President Rodríguez was willing to play ball. But then it shows her on Venezuelan TV completely rejecting all of it and making it crystal clear that she's loyal to President Maduro.
And this wasn't just talk, right? The response came with some very specific demands. They wanted Maduro released immediately, they ordered the military to get ready to fight, and they put out a call to the rest of the world for help.
So, to really get why this rejection was so forceful, the source says we have to look beyond just the day-to-day politics. We need to dig into the personal history of the very person the U.S. was apparently counting on, Vice President Delcy Rodríguez.
And this timeline from the source is, well, it's pretty revealing. It shows a family that's been shaped by conflict with a U.S.-backed government for a long, long time. I mean, her father, a socialist guerrilla, was killed in custody when she was just a little kid. And today, she and her brother are right at the top of a government that's all about continuing that same political legacy.
So you look at all that family history, and the source basically says, yeah, expecting her or her brother to suddenly align with the United States was, in their words, a big stretch. It paints her public rejection not just as a political calculation, but as something deeply personal, a continuation of a lifelong belief system.
Okay, so now the source kind of zooms out a little bit. It doesn't view this whole episode as just a one-off thing. Instead, it frames it as part of a much bigger critique of the U.S. administration's stated foreign policy. And to make this point, the source brings up this quote from then-Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. It really highlights a core promise: to end what she calls the endless cycle of regime change and do foreign policy differently.
So, the argument from the source is that this promise, it's been broken twice. They point to two major examples: a previous attack on Iran, and now this military action against Venezuela.
So where does all this leave us? After laying out all the claims, the counterclaims, the history, the politics, what's the final verdict from the source on how this U.S. plan is going to play out?
And here it is. The source's bottom line is that this plan is going to fail. And not just because of a military mistake or a political miscalculation. No, the reason it gives is much deeper. It's because the plan is a direct assault on Venezuelan national pride and sovereignty, a pride that's been built on a long history of resisting outside influence.
And that really leaves us with this huge question that the source brings up. You know, beyond all the geopolitics and the resources, how important are these things you can't really measure, like national identity? What happens when a foreign policy plan, no matter how carefully laid out, just completely fails to account for that? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining.